Okay, well, over the weekend, the world witnessed the shocking attack on Salman Rushdie. Talk about free speech and cancelling. His book, The Satanic Verses, incited death threats and a fatwa from the Iranian Ayatollah for his assassination when it was published back in '88. The religious death warrant has turned into more than 30 years of terror for Salman Rushdie. Joining me now to discuss this shocking attack is his friend, journalist Shoma Chaudhury. Shoma, welcome to the show. Great to see you. How are you?
I'm good, Rowan. Thank you for having me on your show.
My pleasure. Well, first of all, let me just say we have a mutual friend, Indra Sinha, the writer Indra Sinha, and he suggested I speak to you, and he also said I must give you a big hug. So a big hug from Indra, who's obviously a great friend of yours. Okay, so your reaction, Shoma, when you heard about the stabbing the other day?
I mean, just plain shock, Rowan. This is really like something out of literature that somebody spends his life, a large part of his life in hiding. He literally epitomizes, embodies the principle of free speech now. He became that big global cause célèbre. And then you have a lone wolf attack like this in a setting which is really meant to be about a place of ideas and discourse. And it's such a brutal stabbing, it shows you just how precarious all our lives have become. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, all good. Carry on, Shoma.
And, so really for me, it's just shock, deep sense of dismay, and, the sheer brutality of the injuries that Salman has suffered. It could be something out of his books. It's really out of magic realism that you lose an eye or, your neck nerves are severed. It's terrible. I don't have anything else to say except to say that it's terrible. And even more so that this is not an organized, large organization. It's not the Ayatollah's order. It's not, it's that it's a lone wolf attack. So you're really looking at a kind of unstable psychology out there to which any one of us can become victims. And that reminds us how important public discourse is,
100%, and free speech. In 2012, Shoma, Salman actually wrote in the third person, because he's such a great writer, about his experience, about the shock. A great read in the New Yorker called The Disappeared. I'll just quote a little quote from it. This is him talking about himself, writing about himself on the day the fatwa was announced back in 1988. He looked at the journalists looking at him, and he wondered if this was how people looked at men being taken to the gallows or the electric chair. On air, when he was asked for a response to the threat, he said, "I wish I'd written a more critical book. It was the truth." He did not feel that his book was especially critical of Islam, but, as he said on television that morning, a religion whose leaders behaved in this way could probably use a little criticism. Classic Salman Rushdie understatement. Tell us a little bit about Salman Rushdie, your friend, the man.
It's Rowan, he's, and like I said, in a way, he just epitomizes the principle of free speech because he's acerbic, he's irreverent, he's willing to push boundaries, he's willing to stand by what he believes in. At the heart of free speech is the individual human spirit, that it has no shibboleths, it has, as long as you're not lying and as long as you're not inciting, directly inciting violence and the taking away of others' rights. I'm a free speech fundamentalist, and Salman Rushdie really epitomizes that free speech for me. So, and like I said, when the fact that after he spent 10 years in hiding, the fact that he can come back and say, "I wish I'd written a more critical book," is exactly a defense of the human spirit. We know era after era, all the boundaries of what, how we get to express ourselves as human is because there are individuals out there who are willing to stake themselves to push the boundaries of how a human spirit will express itself. There are always the constraints of the collective, At its heart, free speech is the right to be human. And he really stands for that. So it's fantastic, that when he says that it felt like being taken to the gallows, I can completely understand that. Because as a writer, your material is the lived life. You know, it's your encounter with others. It's your keenly observed of your right to keenly observe the world around you. When you're in hiding, you go into a kind of antiseptic space. You know, you're denied so many experiences of life. So in many ways, it's like cutting him off, even though nothing happened to him in those years. Just the point of being in hiding cut him off from his creative stimuli, you know. So
absolutely. And do you think, Shoma? I mean, the great news is, well, it's always the way, isn't it? The book has jumped to the top of the Amazon list, the Satanic Verses, after all the news. So I guess Salman can take some pleasure from that. But we're also, would you have ever thought 30 years ago that we would be seeing this same intolerant culture in other areas, not from Islam, but from the West? J.K. Rowling has been threatened. You know, someone said on Twitter, well, you're next. So this intolerance, are you afraid that kind of the intolerant genie is out of the bag in the West? How do we put it back?
Absolutely, Rowan. I think you've asked the most important question. I think what's so disturbing now is that, you know, whether it's from, and I say this with care, that whether it's liberals, whether it's the Hindu right, whether it's the Islamic right, whether it's the Christian right, whether it's the, you know, patriotism, nationalism, I mean, we're just being assailed by the armies of different ideologies, you know, different righteousnesses, which just, as I was saying earlier, just undercuts our first universal right, which is our right to be individual and human, you know. And one is seeing that this intolerance garbed in righteousness, you know, we have so far been able to recognize it as religious righteousness. You know, you think you're the custodians and the protectors of whichever God you follow. But now we're also seeing that same intolerance in just our inability to accept that anyone else may have a viewpoint, you know. And I find that most distressing when I see it in the community of people I think as being my community, which is a community of liberals, community of diehard humanists, you know, that if we don't defend the right of those we disagree with, but cancel culture has just become like a contagion, you know. And that's where I feel most let down, because it's understandable if the right wing, you know, what we always look off as the right of center, the ideological right of any view, denies others their rights. That's a kind of mindset one is used to and knows how to fight. But what when that infection pervades into your idea of the world as well, you know? So now it's like a collision course between different intolerances.